It lays the predicate and the foundation for the development of a weather satellite that will permit man to determine the world's cloud layer and ultimately to control the weather, and he who controls the weather will control the world.
A lie told once remains a lie, but a lie told 1,000 times becomes the truth. The rank and file are usually much more primitive than we imagine. Propaganda must therefore always be essentially simple and repetitious. Who are these quotes from? Nazi Minister of Propaganda, Joseph Goebbels. So let's consider this. What is an accurate definition of, quote, conspiracy theorist? The power structure produced knee-jerk term designed to program populations into a psychological defense response of instant mental shutdown. Here's what the term, quote, conspiracy theorist really means. It means anyone who dares to question verifiably false official narratives. Anyone who dares to break from the herd of false patriotism in order to ask legitimate questions and present compelling and, in so many cases, verifiable data. Such individuals are demonized by the power structure-controlled media and the rank and file who follow them. This is Dane Wigington. You're listening to the Global Alert News Hour for June 2nd, 2018. This is a commercial-free program brought to you by geoengineeringwatch.org. It's broadcast throughout Northern California, 1670 AM, 104.9 FM, and 105.7 FM. Saturday mornings from 6 to 7, Sunday mornings from 7 to 8. Global Alert News is also on that order that you want the Spanish version of the flyers. Moving on. Numerous critical headlines to cover today. I'll cover as much as I can in the time allotted. Bear with me. I'll try to connect the dots through this broadcast. But first this. This was posted several days ago on Twitter.com. Roseanne Barr tweeted that, quote, chemtrails are real. Ms. Barr has now been fired from ABC for numerous tweets. But in regard to the climate engineering issue, Roseanne was not as effective as she could have been. She did not stick to the science terms. Roseanne has certainly been aware of climate engineering for years. I salute her for her outspokenness. I met her at a 2012 speaking engagement I had in LA. For the record, again, if we're to have any chance at gaining traction in this all-important battle, we must learn to play chess, stick to the science terms, and media will not be able to so easily marginalize our cause. Roseanne and other celebrities have been all too easily discredited because they left themselves open by using a term that has no basis whatsoever in science, the, quote, chemtrails term. Stick to the science terms if you want to help this battle move forward. Another headline, 5G, yet another unfolding planetary emergency. On March 29th, 2018, the Federal Communications Commission gave its approval to SpaceX's plan to launch an unprecedented 4,425 satellites into low orbit around Earth. And that's only the beginning. SpaceX has applied to the FCC to increase the number of satellites to 12,000 in order to provide, quote, ultra-fast, lag-free internet to every square inch of the Earth. 5G from space. SpaceX's CEO, Elon Musk, has announced his intention to begin launches in 2019, to begin operating as soon as he has about 100 satellites in orbit, and to have at least 800 satellites up and running by 2020. The name of SpaceX's project is Starlink. The global electrical circuit, which sustains all life, is about to be seriously disrupted and disturbed. Now consider this headline from thehill.com. Trump's commerce chief, quote, building a 5G network is a priority. And of course, as is always the case with the power structure, there is virtually no regard for the consequences. From this report, Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross said that building a 5G mobile broadcast network is a chief concern for the Trump administration. Whoever pursues it, whoever does it, we're very much in support of 5G. We need it. We need it for defense purposes. We need it for commercial purposes, Wilbur Ross continued. This is not about the greater good, make no mistake about it. 5G is used for crowd control and they are trying to saturate the planet with this frequency. We are already swimming in a sea of electrosmog, interfering with all life forms, and they are about to ramp that up to unimaginable levels. If you think this is not a threat, you're not living in reality. Another headline from globalresearch.ca, this new headline report, Imperial Recovery and, quote, Disappearing Workers. Imperialism expands, living standards decline. The illusion of the growing economy. Think about the absurdity of this perpetual expansion on a finite planet with finite resources. How hard is that paradigm to see through? From this report, the U.S. imperial experience over the past century embodies the trajectory of the rise and fall of empires. The past quarter century describes the relations between rulers and ruled at a time of declining empire. The Make America Great Again lie of absurdity being pushed by the military-industrial complex that is utilizing the remaining resources left on our planet to build yet more weapons. How many people think such a paradigm can continue much longer? A headline to go with this theme. Here's the headline. How long can it go? Sears will close 63 more stores. Is yours on the list? Question mark. Another headline. Trump says Mexico will eventually pay for the border wall. A headline that goes with that headline. Mexico will never pay for a wall. Country's president tells Trump. All theater, all absurd theater on an imploding, dying planet. And I realize these headlines are dire. Many don't want to hear them, but we must hear them if we're to understand the playing field of which we are a part, and if we are to understand how we can help change directions, each and every one of us. Don't sit on the sidelines thinking someone else is moving the ball up the field. It will take all of us to change directions, all of our efforts. Much more detail on that at the end of this broadcast. Another headline from globalresearch.ca, again, and other sources. The U.S. trade war with China. Trump wants to block countries from using the yuan as a reserve currency. Keep this in mind as I go through these headlines. Imploding biosphere, crashing crops, crashing fisheries, power structure desperation. Follow me through with this. Consider what Trump has just done. This headline from Reuters, U.S. dollar outlook darkens as trade war looms. The Reuters report continues, the U.S. dollar could face headwinds if President Donald Trump's proposals to impose stiff tariffs on steel and other resources continue. Let me back up. There's no could, there's no may, there's no might. The dollar is done. The dollar as the global reserve currency is what has allowed the empire to run so far off the rails. They could print whatever they wanted for whatever they wanted. That's why there's tens of trillions of dollars missing from the Pentagon. Research that. I've been over that in previous broadcasts. Tens of millions of dollars that were printed out of thin air, used to fund programs like the climate engineering insanity that is literally decimating the entire web of life. And we have other countries participating. I'm not just singling out the U.S., but the U.S. and the U.S. military, which is bigger than the next 10 biggest militaries combined, is certainly the majority participant in the climate engineering insanity. And as I've posted at geoengineeringwatch.org in previous weeks, the global departure from normal high temperature maps make clear where the most aggressive geoengineering is taking place. When the only blue portion on the planet on the global departure from normal high temperature maps, blue meaning below normal, in the eastern half of the North American continent, this is the only departure from normal temperatures to the cold side on the entire planet for the last year. And as I'll get to later in this broadcast, even though we had very cold temperatures in the U.S. for April, the U.S. has just recorded its warmest May on record. More on these details later in this broadcast, but here's the bottom line, to be clear. In regard to the U.S. dollar, collapse is not a matter of if, but when. The process is well underway. For the most on-target perspective on this issue, research Hugo Salinas Price. Learn what Mr. Price has to say. This headline from 20thCenturyWire.com, moving on, serves as yet another glaring example of the incomprehensible hypocrisy of the U.S. government. U.S. walks out of UN disarmament forum because Syria was allowed to speak. From the report, today we were told that the U.S. ambassador to the UN in Geneva led a protest over Syria's role at the head of the conference on disarmament, calling the event, quote, a travesty. Apparently, U.S. officials left the room when Syria representatives took the floor. U.S. Ambassador Robert Wood said this, quote, Syria's presence here is a travesty. This regime has committed countless crimes against its own people through the use of chemical weapons, and it just isn't acceptable for them to be leading this body. First, let's consider the false chemical weapons attacks, now proven false, but yet, as I stated in the beginning of this broadcast, when you repeat the lie enough, it becomes truth. And that's exactly what's happening here. For the American population that's told, we are good, they are bad. And when repeated enough, in spite of the facts on the ground, this becomes a reality to most of the American population. We need to wake them up from this false reality. And that's up to all of us. Continuing from this report. What Washington officials failed to acknowledge, however, is their own sordid role in a massive illegal weapons trafficking operation into Syria starting from 2012 and escalating through 2014 and through 2017, culminating in 350 diplomatic charter flights transporting U.S. procured weapons destined for conflict areas like Syria, with much of the cargo heading for known terrorist enclaves in Syria, where weapons, of course, fell into the hands of Al-Qaeda in Syria and ISIS. Additionally, other arms made their way to other conflict zones, including Central Asia and Africa. The total hypocrisy of the U.S. government, to which the majority of the U.S. population is unfortunately still turning two blind eyes. How many nations will have to fall? How many conflicts will have to be created by the military-industrial complex centered in this country before the population clears the lens through which they see the world and understand at this moment in time, the greatest destabilizing force on the planet is the U.S. and some of its allies, Israel being one. And this is not to say that other countries are benevolent. So many people, I still get emails from people that make absurdly simplistic statements. If you criticize the U.S. and Israel, you must be for Russia and China. No, I've never said that. I've said over and over, all of these governments are corrupt. But their threat to the world is in direct proportion to the size of their militaries. And who has the largest of all by far? As I've stated over and over and over. Who has invaded the most countries? By far. No one even compares. Nearly 100 countries in as many years have been invaded and are occupied by this country to pursue, quote, U.S. interests. And what does that mean? It means the resources the empire needs to expand its hegemonic hold on the world. That's what it means. When will the hypocrisy end? When? When will the U.S. population face the truth and stop blindly waving their flags? That's not patriotism, it's tyranny. These are indeed strange days on planet Earth. Earth's life support systems are imploding by the day, and all the while, the mainstream media entertains and distracts the public with ongoing absurd dramas, like the coverage of the former reality show host who now occupies the White House and his extramarital affairs, including the former porn star. Yes, we are truly living in an asylum. Moving on to reports that matter. To make the comparison again, the human race at this point, taken as a whole, is behaving exactly as the former inhabitants of Easter Island, decimating the environment on which their lives depend until the brutal bitter end, and all the while apparently never seeing it coming. If you don't know what happened on Easter Island, please research it and understand we are on exactly the same path. I've made this comparison over and over because it's fitting. It applies. Continuing with headlines. Massive underwater domes of methane look set to blow at any moment. These are existential events that affect all of our futures. And again, while we're watching the kind of theater which I just described, absurd theater to which so many are distracted with, the planet is imploding. From this report on the methane, researchers monitoring a number of massive frozen domes of methane in the Arctic Ocean say there are signs that a series of blowouts could be imminent. It's not imminent. There's no could, there's no may, there's no might. It has already happened. It's been happening for decades. Bermuda Triangle. What was the cause of those ship sinkings? It's methane that's been thawing and releasing on the seafloor for decades. In the case of ships, I've been over this multiple times, but for those who haven't heard it or don't understand it, as the oceans warm and formerly frozen methane deposits on the seafloor thaw and release, it aerates the water like a bottle of champagne. Ships have no buoyancy. They go to the bottom. These methane blowouts have been occurring for decades. There's no could, may, might about it. It's already happening. Methane, why is it so important? Because as it migrates through the water column and into the atmosphere, it starts to cover the planet like a layer of glass. It doesn't just float out into space, just like those who want to try to convince themselves that CO2 is fine, the more the better. Not true. Yes, it's essential for life, but too much is a horrific factor. Because this gas does not just escape into space. It's trapped here in our atmosphere. These are very simple concepts, but so many people want to follow their ideology, what they want to believe, and we need to abandon that sort of thinking. We need to think rationally, logically. If we build up this greenhouse gas layer, and it's happening at blinding speed, methane is a huge factor to which the incredibly untruthful climate science community is not acknowledging. Methane is, over a 10-year time horizon, from 100 to 120 times more potent than CO2 as a greenhouse gas. And these methane blowouts are happening around the globe, most specifically in the Arctic, but they're happening around the globe. Covering the planet like a layer of glass, trapping the heat. Therefore, we're seeing nighttime low temperatures rise twice as fast as daytime highs. The heat is not escaping. Understand that. Climate engineering making it worse still. Not only releasing much more CO2 in the atmosphere from the unimaginable amount of flights that are spraying particulates in the atmosphere, but those sprayed particulates themselves, though they can deflect some daytime heating, they are trapping heat at night. They're destroying the ozone layer. They're disrupting the hydrological cycle. Climate engineering is weather warfare and biological warfare due to the toxic elements. Let me continue with the methane for the moment, though. This is another headline. It's not just escaping in the Arctic, it's escaping elsewhere. This is from phys.org, phys.org. Researchers document widespread methane seeps off the Oregon coast. Just how much methane is off the northwest coast, this is from the report, is uncertain. The researchers say, but it appears to be a lot and could cause, there we are, could, may, might, cause potential environmental problems. And that's where the total betrayal of the academic community comes in. They will never tell the full truth because it's a bad career decision for them, but they need to stop worrying about their career and start worrying about the planet supporting life. Isn't that a bigger priority? Tell the truth, academicians. Tell the truth. There's no could, may, might. We face immediate, near-term existential threats, getting worse by the day. A reminder on this title from NPR. This is an excuse by which the climate engineers or the power structure can release pathogens around the world. Here's from this NPR report. Are there zombie viruses in the thawing permafrost? I want to remind everybody of this headline. In the past few years, there has been growing fear about a possible consequence of climate change, zombie pathogens, specifically bacteria and viruses preserved for centuries in frozen ground, the kind of methane I've just described, coming back to life as the Arctic's permafrost starts to thaw. This is certainly a premise by which the military-industrial complex can fully unleash biological warfare and then try to convince populations that it's just nature, not nature. Think past the smoke and mirrors. Back to the thawing planet. From BBC and other sources, this headline. Giant canyons discovered in Antarctica. Scientists have discovered 3 vast canyons in one of the last places to be explored on Earth, under the ice at the South Pole. From the report, the canyons play a key role in controlling the flow of ice. If Antarctica thins in a warming climate, as scientists suspect it will, let's stop there for a moment. If, may, could, might. How can the ice not thin in a warming world. And why is it that scientists only suspect it will? Don't they know it will? Don't they know that ice melts when it gets too warm? Is that something we need legions of academicians to tell us? Just like the report I've cited numerous times, it took 2 or 3 dozen scientists 3 years to come to the conclusion that the ice was melting on Greenland and the meltwater was flowing into the sea. Did it take dozens of academicians years to figure this out? Academia is nothing but a tool for the power structure at this point. And I know there are some exceptions. But as a whole, academia has and continues to betray the human race and the entire web of life. Academia and those in academia who truly care about the greater good need to stand together, to stand up, and to start telling the whole truth. Finishing from this giant canyons discovered in Antarctica report. Then these channels, these canyons, there we are, the word could accelerate mass towards the ocean, further raising sea levels. There's no could, there's no may, there's no might. The ice is melting, the water is running off, and sea levels are rising. There's no could, may, might. But those are the types of terms academicians use to downplay the immediacy and severity of what's unfolding, which helps to pacify the populations, to put them back to sleep, which serves the power structure. All of us have to break this paradigm, and we have to see through these headlines. And for those who correctly state that NASA is a part of the power structure, and NOAA and the National Weather Service, so therefore we can't believe anything they say, well, that's true to a point. But here's the part that must be remembered. Everything so far that any of these official agencies have stated is far worse than what they stated it would be. Far worse. These agencies exist to pacify populations until the last possible moment. They are not exaggerating the severity of what's unfolding. Again, they're downplaying it with words like could, may, might, someday, 100 years from now. None of that is true. Abrupt climate collapse is not off on the horizon somewhere. It's here, now. Continuing with headlines from multiple sources, consider this report. Temperatures soar as Sweden's heat wave sizzles on. From that report, Sweden's weather agency has warned of fire risks as temperatures push 30 degrees C in the hottest May on record. Not just in the U.S., elsewhere around the world. How many people think there should be massive forest fire risks in Sweden in May? Does that sound normal to anyone? Sweden's weather agency, the SMHI, issued warnings on Wednesday of last week for fire risks across almost the entirety of Sweden. Another headline report, multiple sources. New Zealand's glaciers shrank significantly in sizzling hot summer temperatures. The summer heat wave has massively affected New Zealand's glaciers, resulting in the largest annual ice loss on record. Records on top of record on top of record. Let me continue. From robertwesterner.blogspot.com, this headline, Mexico burning, life-threatening temperatures hitting 50 degrees C. That's 122 degrees Fahrenheit, by the way. A heat wave in Mexico that has increased temperatures to 50 degrees C, 122 degrees Fahrenheit, in many areas has led authorities to declare a state of emergency. The country's National Weather Service said Thursday. It's here now. The only way that we're seeing the weather whiplash cool downs is when the climate engineers can manipulate enough moisture over a particular region to use chemical ice nucleating elements to create a cold, dense layer of air that descends to the surface and cools the temperatures down. And the use of chemical ice nucleating elements doesn't necessarily mean anything frozen will fall to the surface. It simply radically reduces the temperature of that moisture, which creates a cold, dense layer of air which descends to the surface. This is not to say that frozen precipitation won't fall. It often does fall, and now often in the form of massive hailstones. How many of those storms have we seen of late also? Moving on, from zerohedge.com and other sources. Wicked weather. Midwest jumps from coldest April to hottest May on record. Just spoke about that earlier in this broadcast. From that report, a plethora of heat records were broken this past weekend, including Minneapolis, Minnesota. Temperatures there soared to over 100 degrees Fahrenheit, which shattered the former daily record. Overall, just over 1,900 high-temperature records were tied or broken across the U.S. from May 22nd to May 28th. How many people saw that on mainstream media? Also for the record, it's now official, May 2018 was the 401st consecutive month of above normal global temperatures. Yes, 401 months in a row. Officially, I would argue the actual stats are worse still. With the global climate engineering assault helping to fuel the overall fire. But remember and consider, every single form of human activity that alters the energy balance of the planet, that alters nature, is a part of the problem. It's not a simple equation. It's not a this or that. And for those people who claim that I must be an Al Gore fan because I admit the planet's warming, no, that's not the case. I have great disdain for Mr. Gore. He's a part of the power structure. But what does it take for us to recognize reality? The planet's descending into an abrupt climate collapse, and climate engineering is fueling the problem. Perhaps, I would argue mathematically, the single greatest factor in the equation, but hardly the only factor. And anyone who thinks in black and white terms and wants to focus only on climate engineering, pretending that no other form of human activity has damaged the planet, that's not rational. It's simply not rational. We need to acknowledge the entire problem. If we ever expect academia to show some courage and come out of the shadows, we need to stand on reality. Yes, we've decimated the planet in countless ways, but there can be no legitimate discussion about the climate without acknowledging climate engineering first and foremost. Moving on. From Watchers.news, there's this headline report. Violent thunderstorms produce more than 400,000 lightning strikes in 48 hours in Europe. Let's remember, when you ionize the atmosphere, when you make it more electrically conductive, which climate engineering is doing, these are electrically conductive particulates that are used for many purposes: over-the-horizon radar, DARPA weapons, EMP offense and defense, many purposes, communications. It is also ionizing the atmosphere, making it more electrically conductive, creating thus more lightning and more heating. By the way, when you microwave these particulates, that creates additional heating in addition to these particulates trapping heat as well in the atmosphere. How's the weather overall? Globally, extreme weather whiplash events will continue to worsen rapidly. We're now in completely uncharted territory on planet Earth. That will become more apparent in the weeks and months to come. Backing up a few days, consider this headline from WGN-TV Weather Team. Record Chicago heat. Tropical storm Alberto makes landfall. Some important dots here I want to connect. Please try to follow this. End of May temperatures in Chicago and Minnesota were record-shattering highs up to 100 degrees and over. And then comes the miraculous track of Tropical Storm Alberto, just in time to cool things down. As I just stated, when the climate engineers can manipulate enough moisture into certain regions and chemically nucleate it, they can and are temporarily and toxically cooling down those regions. And that's what Alberto was used for. That miraculously even strengthened while over land. Didn't strengthen over the record warm Gulf of Mexico, but somehow strengthened over land because they needed that moisture, that circulation to move far enough north to cool down these regions that were experiencing record high temperatures. But all the while, these temporary toxic cool downs being carried out by the climate engineers are worsening the overall warming of the planet. Every time the climate engineers intervene with the natural systems, they do immense damage. How much longer can this continue? Now, follow me through again with the manipulation of storms like this. We covered very thoroughly the hurricanes last year. Again, we went from a 12-plus year hurricane drought to the most costly hurricane damage year in the Atlantic Basin ever recorded. How can you have that kind of a flip? Because now climate engineering is being used as a weapon of war against the U.S. population. We can speculate on the agendas. We can speculate on that. But the fact that these cyclones are being manipulated is beyond speculation. Let me give another example of that. Here's a headline. The war in Yemen and the making of a chaos state. This is from the Atlantic from earlier this year. Here's the important part of this report. The 1,000-day war in Yemen has embroiled nearly a dozen nations since the war began in March 2015. That's the important part, the date. That's when the assault on Yemen began. Consider the next headline. Cyclone Chapala, to make landfall in Yemen as first hurricane-strength cyclone ever to make landfall in that location. November 2nd, 2015. Just a coincidence? We have the U.S. showing its allegiance to Saudi Arabia, the dictatorship that beheads dissenters, selling them weapons, backing them up with the slaughter of Yemen. Is it a coincidence that shortly after the start of that conflict, suddenly we have the first hurricane-strength cyclone to make landfall? Let's continue. Here's a week-old headline. Strongest cyclone on record makes landfall in Yemen, dumps 3 years of rain in days. This is a Category 3, the most powerful cyclone on record to hit that region. Are these all just coincidences? Really? As I've outlined again and again and again, every single Middle Eastern country named by Wesley Clark 1 week after 9/11, plans that were clearly laid out long before, every single country underwent a once-in-1,000-year drought. Every country that was toppled and destabilized. Not a coincidence. Leaders of those countries, like Iran, stating on the record their rain was being cut off by NATO weather modification programs. Now we have this type of assault on countries that are already being devastated. Greatest man-made humanitarian disaster perhaps in history, the slaughter of the Yemenis people by Saudi Arabia, backed up by the US and UK, biggest weather modification forces in the world, especially with the US, and we have record cyclones hitting the exact areas that Saudi Arabia would certainly be all for. Devastate the Yemenis people. None of this is coincidence. Climate engineering is real and ongoing, and the betrayal of academia, who is so committed to the lie right now. Consider this, academia is so committed to their lying and denying of climate engineering that now to admit its reality would be to admit that they have been a part of this criminal cover-up for decades. So they just keep doubling down on the lie, that it's not happening. But this lie will be exposed, along with all of those who participated in this criminal cover-up. All of us need to help this happen. The sooner the better. The sooner we can expose and halt climate engineering, the more we may have yet to salvage of what's left of our planet. The combination of excessive heat and contamination is severely impacting water supplies in countless locations around the globe. Here's one recent example, headline report that covers this issue. All of this is connected. Again, the imploding biosphere, the part of climate engineering in that implosion, along with other forms of human activity. Oregon governor deploys National Guard, declares Salem water situation emergency. Update, May 31st, 2 p.m. Governor Kate Brown is declaring an emergency and mobilizing Oregon National Guard soldiers in response to an ongoing water quality situation in and around Salem, Oregon. Brown's office said Thursday that the troops would bring large portable water tanks known as water buffaloes to the Salem area to ease the shortage of bottled water on Thursday evening. The city of Salem announced officials had detected levels of toxins in the city drinking water supply. The toxins are caused by an algae bloom in the local drinking water. It's too hot, waterways are too warm, there's runoff, there's toxins, it's creating these algae blooms. The hydrological cycle is being completely contaminated by climate engineering. We do not know and cannot know what's being introduced in the contaminated rainfall that's a part of the climate engineering. We know this. We know that E. coli is being used as a chemical ice nucleating agent. Popular Science acknowledges, geoengineeringwatch.org covered it. Popular Science found E. coli bacteria at 33,000 feet and could not figure out how it got there. How do you think it got there when we know this is a material used for chemical ice nucleation? We don't know what is the true source of contamination in any particular setting right now, but what we do know, as President Johnson stated in his 1962 speech, which is the lead-in to every week's geoengineeringwatch.org broadcast, he who controls the weather controls the world. And that's not just controlling the weather, it's controlling what's contaminated and what's not. It controls every single breath we take, which is now contaminated with everything, anything that the climate engineers choose to put in our air column. And all the while, academia and official sources lying about what's happening in our skies. Total betrayal of the human race and the entire web of life. Continuing on, this is biological warfare, nothing less. From multiple sources, New Zealand to slaughter thousands of cows and attempt to eliminate mycoplasma bovis bacteria. From this report, New Zealand plans to slaughter about 150,000 cows as it tries to eradicate a strain of disease-causing bacteria from the national herd. The eradication may cost New Zealand nearly $1 billion. Contamination everywhere. I'm not stating climate engineering is the only source, but if anyone thinks that they are not carrying out biological warfare operations along with these programs, think again. This is business as usual for the power structure that knows the current paradigm can't continue much longer. They know the planet will not support the population much longer, and they certainly, inarguably, are doing their best, along with everything else they're trying to accomplish, to thin the herd, our herd. And this is not to say, for those who make the false and discrediting claim that climate engineering is only about eugenics, that is not true. It's many, many things. Don't marginalize our cause by making an absurd claim that it's about one thing. It's about many things. Be credible. Don't oversimplify and discredit our cause. Another headline from globalcitizen.com and other sources: the world is becoming uninhabitable for animals. From this report, the Paris Climate Agreement could help. There we are. Could, may, might. No, the Paris Climate Agreement is absolute fraud. Just cover for the climate engineers. That's all it is. As climate change causes temperatures to rise, animals all over the world are being forced to find new places to live. At the same time, available habitats are shrinking, sea levels are rising, storms are becoming more extreme, and human development increases in previous wild areas. These pressures and many more are pushing many species to extinction. In fact, just to refresh that extinction rate, we're losing 200 to 300 species a day, plant, animal, and insect, to extinction. That's 1.5 million of normal. Can't continue much longer. In fact, up to half the geographic ranges for tens of thousands of animals, here we are, could be lost by 2100, according to a paper just published in the Journal of Science. There we are, could, may, might by 2100. To be clear, mathematically speaking, on the current course, if we do not change directions, none of us will be here by 2100. None of us will be here by 2050. Likely much, much sooner than that. All of these could, may, might reports are simply a form of pacification for the population who, even though this sounds extreme and should be taken seriously, is still radically short of how severe things really are. Now let's throw this headline into the mix from thehill.com. As if the wildlife populations aren't dying fast enough already, consider this headline again from thehill.com. Pro-hunting Trump officials take axe to wildlife protections. The Trump administration is systematically rolling back protections for endangered wildlife and expanding rights for hunters, winning cheers from sporting associations, but worrying environmentalists who fear it will lead to the extinction of protected species. The National Park Service announced last week it would end protections that prohibited the hunting of bear cubs as well as wolves and pups in their dens in Alaska's natural preserves. What kind of hunter would shoot an animal in its den? A coward, an absolute coward, especially when those animals are struggling to survive as it is. The insane asylum we live in. That's what all this adds up to. It's an absolute free-for-all of unbridled insanity. Moving on. So not only is there now no regard for preserving, protecting Earth's remaining wildlife, there's the quest for the remaining resources, as I stated, as the biosphere implodes. From AmityUnderground.com, this headline: 15 years after the invasion of Iraq, and now largely out of the glare of the media, U.S. and UK oil corporations start to flaunt the spoils of imperial conquest. That's what the Middle East fiascos are all about. Resources, resources, resources. Not freedom, not democracy. Another headline. This is from multiple sources. Trump's new army, ? Saudi Arabia in talks to build Syrian Arab force, report says. From this publication, President Donald Trump's plans to gather troops from allied Arab nations, i.e. Saudi Arabia, in a bid to bolster U.S.-backed efforts in Syria. Saudi Arabia joined Western nations and other oil-rich Sunni Muslim monarchies and Turkey in supporting efforts to overthrow Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. A post-U.S. invasion al-Qaeda insurgency spread from neighboring Iraq. A significant amount of U.S. and Saudi weaponry ended up in the hands of ISIS. Been over this again and again and again. This is part of the plan. It's not to defeat ISIS. It's to use ISIS to destabilize nations that the U.S. empire and its allies can then take over and extract the resources from. It's what it's always been about. Another headline from multiple sources. U.S. moves hundreds of tanks to Poland, calling it a drill, but clearly a preparation for war. Let me stop there for a moment as I've pointed out in previous broadcasts, which country has the largest remaining reserves of natural resources by far? Russia, clearly a target. Yet, at the same time, let's consider this. We know absolutely positively that major global powers are colluding and cooperating on the climate engineering issue. We have 800-page Senate documents posted at geoengineeringwatch.org that proves this. In the case of Russia and Israel and the potential conflict in Syria, why is Netanyahu now meeting with Putin? And what's really going on behind the curtain, and how much cooperation on other issues is actually going on? We can't know what's happening behind the curtain, but certainly there is a great deal of colluding and cooperating between global powers that at face value appear to be in opposition to each other. But what's the whole story? How much cooperation is really taking place? What is the bigger picture agenda? In reality, time will tell. Before I move on, here's a summary reminder of the critical pieces of the puzzle and how they connect. Climate and biosphere implosion pushes power structures toward unbridled desperation in their quest for total control and for the resources they need to maintain this control. As the global populations are forced to wake up and face reality, forced to face the total tyranny of their so-called governments, those same governments will do whatever they feel they must in order to retain their power and control. With that in mind, let's remember this fact, which I have covered in the past. U.S. government agencies have purchased nearly 2 billion rounds of 40 caliber hollow point bullets. This type of ammunition is for one purpose: inflicting maximum damage to a human target. To be clear, if you think that those who control your government care any more for you than they do, for example, the Palestinians, wake up and think again. As the resources run out, those in power will stop at nothing to retain this power until the brutal bitter end. You can count on that. On that note, this headline report: Palestinians face explosive bullets and dangerous gas bombs. Demonstrators suffer wounds of, quote, unusual severity as Israeli forces introduce deadlier weapons in Gaza protests. Medics on the ground say Israeli forces are shooting at demonstrators with a new type of round never seen before, known as the butterfly bullet, which explodes on impact, pulverizing tissue, arteries, and bone while causing severe internal injuries. All 24 amputees were shot with a single explosive bullet, including 2 journalists who succumbed to their wounds after being shot in the abdomen. Quote, all of their internal organs were totally destroyed and pulverized, said Gaza's health ministry spokesman. The bullets are the deadliest the Israeli army has ever used. The report continues. Medical staff from Doctors Without Borders operating in Gaza say patients who have been shot with these rounds have sustained fist-sized wounds of unusual severity. Let's stop there and again back up. Nearly 2 billion rounds of 40 caliber hollow point purchased by U.S. agencies. Who do you think that much ammunition is for? That's 6+ bullets for every single man, woman, and child in this country. Why would they need nearly 2 billion rounds? Good question. Moving on. Israeli minister threatens to destroy Gaza once and for all. I'm using these examples because they are connected to the bigger picture. It shows the power structure desperation with those power sources that seem immune to international law. That's why these headlines are being covered. Which countries are the most immune to international law? Who ignore it the most? The U.S. and Israel. That's the fact of the matter. Sorry if you don't like to hear that. That's the way it is. Not that other countries are innocent, not at all. But which countries most blatantly and aggressively commit crimes while ignoring international law? U.S. and Israel. As Israel bombed Gaza dozens of times in the past day, again, a senior Israeli minister has incited the total destruction of Gaza. Flagrant violations of international law. Next, this headline. Proposed Israeli law criminalizes filming soldiers. Human rights violations. You cannot film a soldier, Israeli soldier, committing a crime, or you will end up in jail. A controversial new bill set to go before Israel's Ministerial Committee for Legislation would ban taking videos or photos of Israeli soldiers in the process of arresting or subduing Palestinians. It's a move that advocacy groups are decreeing as an aggressive censorship measure aimed at banning the documentation of Israeli soldiers' human rights violations. Why is this a surprise? the punishment of up to 5 to 10 years in prison for merely recording encounters between Israeli soldiers and Palestinians, because they are butchering them from a distance, snipers shooting unarmed Palestinians. And why am I focused on this issue? Because it is a glaring example of what the rest of us will soon be subjected to if we continue to ignore reality. And if you think that our government, Israel's government, or for that matter, any other government in the end will care about their populations, think again. If you're one of those who still blindly believes in American exceptionalism, please wake up and look at what your country is doing around the world, from torture, invasion, illegal bombing. The list goes on and has gone on and on for decades and decades and decades. How many examples do we need before the population wakes up and shows some sense of responsibility toward the whole and reins in their completely out of control government and the military-industrial complex that runs their government? And in regard to what's happening in Palestine right now, we are told that there will be investigations, that Israel will investigate itself. Do we really believe any investigation will actually occur? Of course not. Nothing we'll hear about. Did we ever hear anything else about the Pat Tillman investigation, assassinated by our own military because they feared he would help expose the ongoing criminal behavior of the U.S. military? And if you don't know who Pat Tillman was, if you don't know his story, then show the courage to objectively research it. Pat Tillman was a true patriot, not a willfully blind, flag-waving tyrant. Remember and consider that the current path toward near-term planetary omnicide would not be possible without legions of willfully blind, honorless, order-following tyrants. And this definition covers every side of the fence: left, right, so-called conservative, so-called liberal, Democrats, Republicans. Question: how many do we see from any side of the fence facing and focusing on the most dire truths and the most critical priorities? How many? Answer: very, very few, even at this late hour, even with all the converging catastrophes closing in from every side, even with the inarguably obvious implosion of the current paradigm. So many are still sitting the bench, thinking someone somewhere will save the day, will run onto the field and save the day. Not going to happen. It's up to all of us. Let's focus now on how you can help, how you can make a difference for the better. Prioritize. Spend what time you can learning at least the basic fundamentals of the most important issues, the most dire and immediate threats we face. For the record, the highly toxic global climate engineering, weather warfare, biological warfare assault is mathematically the greatest and most immediate threat we face, short of nuclear cataclysm. Next, arm yourself with credible data from a credible source. See the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org for informational, flyer, and booklet links that can be shared for free from your own home computer. Full activist suggestions links are also on the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org. Passing on credible data with shocking, compelling, and inarguable images is exponentially more effective at waking others than, for example, pointing at the sky and ranting chemtrails. This term has no basis in science whatsoever. Stick to the scientific terms. Again, pass on credible data. That's the best key to the door of waking others. Keeping credible informational flyers with you makes planting the seeds of awareness simple and straightforward. Again, free downloadable flyer links are available on the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org, so flyers can be printed locally, or they can again be purchased from Geoengineering Watch for our approximate cost of producing and shipping. I always keep these materials with me when I'm in a health food store or passing any sort of medical office or a gym even, where people obviously care about their health, a workout facility, if you will. It's very easy to enter such a facility. Don't go into a long rant. Simply state that there's a critically important issue that our government and the media is not telling us about, and it affects all of us, and pass on a flyer and walk away. It's that simple. It's not hard. Any of us can do it. And though I know none of us wanted this job, I certainly never wanted this job. I certainly never wanted to spend the last 15 years of my life at this. But I can't do otherwise. I simply can't, not while this is going on. All of us are needed in this effort. What good will it do to wake the masses? How will that help? To be clear, reaching a critical mass of awareness is the only way forward in this battle. The scale will tip the moment when enough of the population, which includes the legions of blind order followers who are participating in the insanity in one form or another, realize they are participating in sinking the very ship on which they and their children's lives also depends. This, of course, includes the men and women in the U.S. military. We must all work together in the task of waking them up to what they are a part of, to what they are participating in. Again, we must reach a critical mass of awareness. This can only be done at a grassroots level, and again, that effort will take all of us. I'll end with this question. How many of us will stop to ask ourselves why we are here? What's the point? What's the purpose? What's our purpose? Are we here only to pursue our own personal pleasures at any cost? At the cost of our children's lives and futures? Indeed, at the cost of the entire web of life on this once thriving planet? Or are we here for a greater purpose? Are we here to learn, to grow, to mature, to fully open our eyes to the truth, and then to act according to the dictates of morality and reason? Are we here to do our part for the whole? Are we here to do our part in standing against the collective insanity? Are we not responsible to struggle against the fading of the light? Stand and make your voice heard while you can. And consider this: if we all stand together, we can yet make a profound difference. Even at this late hour, we can yet make a quantum leap in the right direction. Never give up. Until next week, this is Dane Wigington with geoengineeringwatch.org.